everybody. Welcome to Laugh Anyway, the podcast where we learn to take life's lessons, all the things that throws at us, and laugh anyway. Sometimes it's not that funny, but we're going to learn how to get through it together. My name's Elijah Tyndall. Perhaps you've heard of me. Maybe not. I've got a comedy special on Prime you should certainly check out. I am an author, best-selling, your words, not mine. And more than anything right now, comic and podcast host. Thanks for joining. Thanks to all the sponsors who make this very possible without interruption from big corporate companies. But I will say this, if a big corporate company came to me with some good money right about now, you'd certainly be hearing a commercial. Brother got to pay the bills, kids need shoes, and daddy needs work. Hey, welcome. So here's the deal. I thought more than ever, since this is going to be the first episode that we film and put on the YouTube channel, I thought I would revisit the topic of becoming who it is we're really supposed to be. Igniting the potential within us. Now, I know you hear that and you're like, oh boy, another one of these. Well, just bear with me and listen to the at least 30 seconds more, because I think this is much needed right now in this culture. Did you know it's impossible for a bumblebee to fly? It can't be done. A bumblebee cannot fly. This, according to all of our people who study aviation, the engineers, the builders, the people who are very smart, very educated, and there's no shade being thrown on them, because what they've concluded is that the bumblebee structure, the big fuselage body of the bumblebee, is too big for the little wings that has been given in life to take flight. It can't be done. There's nothing that we can produce. There's nothing that we can build using those same dimensions that would produce flight consistently. It can't be done. The bumblebee cannot fly. It's impossible. Now, the only one who doesn't know this is the bumblebee. The bumblebee wakes up every morning and it gets this little coffee. It feels confident about itself. It feels so confident that it wears its stripes this way. You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't care. It's part of the movement against body shaming. That little joker just goes out and flaunts its stuff and takes flight every day. Every day, the bumblebee's assumption is, I have wings, therefore I can fly. It hasn't even paused to consider what all of these people who have studied it have concluded about its limitations. I submit to all of us today that we are much like the bumblebee, but the problem is we are so consumed with what comes in to our senses, what comes in the information channels to our brain that sinks down in our heart by people who have concluded what we can or we cannot become or accomplish based off of the size of our wings versus the size of the task that we think that we were here for. The bumblebee doesn't think about any of that. The bumblebee just wakes up, sees its wings, and decides that it is here to do a certain thing, and it does that thing. As a matter of fact, the bumblebee not only does what others consider impossible for it to do, but it is the highest producer of pollination. Why? Because the bumblebee's body is so big. So not only does it get up and fly with this big old boned body, but it contracts to itself. It attracts and sticks on to more pollen. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. There's experts that know. I got a good buddy who has bee communities, and I know he would correct me in my terminology on this, but the truth is that thing, because of its big body, it attaches the most pollen to itself and carries it around. It is the highest producer of pollination among the bees, and yet it is impossible for it to do the first level of the task. Not only does it do the first level of the task, it is doing the above and beyond. Friend, today we're going to dive back into looking at our wings. Looking not just at the impossibility of the task in front of us or before us, but looking at the wings that we've been given in life, because those wings that we've been given in life were placed there for a reason. Now, you may look at your life and say, I don't have any wings, but someone else could look at your life and say, I wish I had the wings that they had. There's always someone, and we know that, there's always someone in a worse off position. There's always someone that's, and so we understand that. That doesn't minimize our feelings of inadequacy, because those are real feelings. And reality, becomes what we perceive. So our perception of something, it becomes our reality. And so if we perceive ourselves to be grasshoppers, small, little, then we will act as if we're little. And if we act as if we're little, others will say, oh, well, that's a little person. That is someone who cannot accomplish a lot of stuff. Why? Because the fruit that they bear on their tree is not, it's not worthy, it's not big, it's not ripe, it's not good, it's constantly less than what we're interested in. Why? Not because of them, but because of our perception of what kind of fruit we can bear. I know I threw like 5 different analogies into that, but you're with me. I remember when I was young, I stuttered horribly. I mean, I stuttered so bad. I was one of those guys, I couldn't get the sentences out. I was like, hey, how you doing today? And I could not. The more nervous I would get, the more I would stutter. I stuttered so bad that my 5th grade teacher, she told me, she said, Elijah, I don't know what it is that you're going to do whenever you're older and grown up, but whatever it is, you'll never be able to do anything that requires you to talk, to use your voice for a living. And today we're on a podcast hosted by me. Today I have a prime special where I do comedy for 45 minutes. Today I make a livelihood out of going from place to place and state to state, speaking. I talk at public schools. I talk at prisons. I do comedy at clubs. I do comedy at conferences. I speak for, that is my livelihood. But if you look at the wings that I had when I was in 5th grade, what was being spoken over me is the task that you may think, because I didn't think that that's what I was going to do with my life, but it was being fed to me, it was being handed to me based off of the size of the wings that they saw, not the ability that those wings internally had to carry me. And I'll talk more about that and how I overcame that over time when I was a senior in high school and I went into broadcasting as a livelihood. But what I want everyone to understand is this. I want you to understand that there are 2 versions of you. And this is exciting because it's the first episode that we're posting on the YouTube. On the YouTube, it's the first episode we're posting on the YouTube. And I know I've talked about some of these principles before on the podcast, but it's certainly, right now, golly, it's certainly worth going back into and reminding ourselves of. Why? Because we've been through this season where things have been stripped away, where there's a season of rebuilding. There's a season tons of stuff happened during the pandemic and the lockdowns and all this. Tons of stuff like that happened. And some of us didn't make it in areas. I had a heart attack during the time. I went through a divorce during the time. I'm in a season where my father is going through treatments for cancer. My nana has dementia. All kinds of interesting stuff that's happening right now. And if there's ever been a time to remind ourselves of the potential within the wing ability that we've been given to accomplish the task, because a lot of us have gone into just survival mode. Versus like, I'm going for my dreams. I'm going for the things that I want. I'm going for those things. A lot of us have gone into survival mode. And survival mode means I'm just going to get by. And as long as our minds keep us there in I'm going to survive, then we'll never go above and thrive. Hey, those 2 rhyme. But we'll never accomplish that. So what we have to do is we have to relook at the wings and stop listening to the people who have studied all the reasons that we can't. There's certain motives behind people who tell you that you can't. A lot of times they don't want you to. Why? Because they're either jealous of the wings that you've been given and the call on your life, the assignment on your life, and so they don't want you to even try because they on the inside are concerned that what if you do? What if you do accomplish that and it's greater than the things that they're going for? So there's that, there's the jealousy, there's the anger that they don't have the kind of wings that you have. And I can relate with this. I remember one time I was listening to a song on the radio and this woman, I think it was Whitney Houston, and she was just, she was singing. And I was like, oh, and I said this, I said, God, if you had only given me, if you just gave me that gift, I'd be so singing for you. I'd give you acknowledgement, all the award shows. I'd use my gift for, and he just kind of shut me up. He's like, dude, you don't even use the gifts that I've given you already. What makes you think that having that gift would be the thing that causes you to behave different? See, he who is faithful in little will be made ruler over much. And if we don't do with what we have our best, we're not going to do any better with something additional to that. And so I put me in check because I was looking at someone else's wings. And I was ignoring the fact that I have a gifting and calling and assignment on my life. And so there's no better time than right now for us to tap back into this understanding of the wings that we have. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at 5 things that they won't be all on this episode, but we're going to start on them. The 5 things that cause a mindset limitation. When I say mindset, that simply means, most of you have heard that term before, but those who haven't, it means this: the way our mind is set. Duh, that sounds pretty easy, huh? The way our mind is set. All of us have different sets of thinking. The way that we think, the way our mind is set. And it's based off of how we were raised and what we were exposed to. Vision comes through exposure. You can't have a vision for something until you're exposed to it. But once you're exposed to that, you begin to understand that thing. And so if you're exposed to nothing but poverty in your life and no understanding of you could do something in your lifetime to change this, there's possibly something on the inside of you that could break away from this, but you've only ever been handed, there's never enough. That we are victims, that there's this world is not fair to us, then you're only exposed to that. You'll never have a vision beyond that. But the moment someone steps in and goes beyond that, it starts to create a vision. You're exposed to something else. Vision comes through exposure. And so what I want to do is I want to expose us to this new thing that is on the inside of us. It's not new, it's actually been laying on the inside of us. I think it's a spiritual principle. When Jesus, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, you might hear his name a few times following me, but when Jesus was asked, how do we pray? By his disciples. His disciples were the guys who followed him around. The 12, they mentioned the 12. And they said, Lord, teach us how to pray. How are we supposed to pray effectively? He said this, he said, our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let's just pause right there and stop right there, because that's enough for today's lesson on what Jesus was saying to them in terms of how you approach this thing. He said, acknowledge God, our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Acknowledge God, acknowledge his greatness, in the universe, in our hearts, in our lives. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what we're saying is, may heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So your kingdom in heaven, come here to earth. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we can start to factor that in. If we're praying to God to release heaven here on earth, and that's what we're praying for, then we look at the fact that we are the representatives of God. And God's release of heaven on this earth comes through us. And there's all kinds of theology that I can go into to back that up, but we are created in God's image. Genesis 1:26 and 1:27, for those of you Bible thumpers out there. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Both male and female, he created them. Two words image are used there. The first image, if you translate it down, which I have, it means this: God created man in his imagination. Image means imagination in that first part that he created. That means he was thinking this through. It was not an accident. You could be have been a surprise to your unexpected parents, but you were not an accident. You were placed here on purpose. You had an assignment to be released into this atmosphere, and that assignment was timed out. You were exactly where you needed to be at the right time. Some people say, I'd like to go to the olden days, and that's the era I should have been born in. No, you shouldn't have, because you wouldn't work in the olden days. Because you know what you love? You love air conditioning. You love heating. You love toilets that flush. In the olden days, they didn't have that stuff. You like the concept and some things about the olden days, but you were created to be right here. You're designed to be right here. Your wings flap the best right here, right now. And the second word, image, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, both male and female, he created them. That second word, image, means DNA, in the very DNA of God. So when we pray to God, God, send heaven, your will here on earth as it is in heaven. We are releasing heaven on earth. And how do we release heaven on earth? This is where we start, really, with the mindset limitation identifiers. It goes like this. There's a passage that a guy named Saul of Tarsus, who later became Paul, another follower of the gospel of Christ, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's okay. These are still great, true spiritual truths and spiritual laws. And so whether you be a believer, so there's some things that you don't, doesn't have to be in the Bible or have to, there's laws. There's the law of gravity. That's a physical law. There's a law of gravity. So whether you believe or not in gravity, you are still operating under the law of gravity. So that's how it works. There's the law of sowing and reaping. Whether you believe in sowing and reaping, it doesn't matter. You're still operating in sowing and reaping. That means what you put out is actually what you get back in life. And so if you need something, put out that same thing in the form that you can and watch that thing multiply and grow and come back to you. If you need encouragement, look for people to encourage. If you need kindness, be kind to others. If you need finances, look how you can provide for someone else in need. You may not have finances, but you always have seed. God provide seed to the sower. If you have a heart for sowing and giving, you will have seed. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to give money, because that's exactly what you need, but it does mean you'll be able to give something that they may need. It does mean if someone's hungry and they would use that money that they need to buy food, maybe you have some extra cans of food and you could provide that. You see, you sow in the area. And so what Saul said here, and Paul turned it into Paul, he said this. He said, it's in a passage in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, for my Bible thumpers. It says this. It says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that way you can prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Remember, this is what we're looking for. The perfect will of God. Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are the carriers of God's will here on earth. So it's important that we understand God's will. Now, this passage in Romans tells us how to accomplish God's will. It says this: don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that don't be conformed to this world means this. It means I'm not supposed to try to become like somebody else. Anyone else that's in my world, whether they good, bad, or indifferent, because a lot of times we think, well, just don't try to be like the people who are horrible. Well, of course we wouldn't want to be like the people who are horrible, but we are transformed. This means don't be conformed to anyone else where it changes who you are. Why? Because you've been given specific set sets of wings to accomplish the specific task and assignment on your life. So therefore, remember how I was wanting to sing like Whitney Houston? Well, I'm not supposed to sing like Whitney Houston. I'm supposed to do exactly what I do. And Whitney Houston was never supposed to do what I can do. She was supposed to sing with her wings. Do you understand? Don't be conformed to this world. Why? Because let's just say we're all puzzle pieces. And if we were all puzzle pieces, how it operates, you know, you've done a puzzle, it operates that you have different shapes with a different image on there. And if we're all fitly joined together, what's going to happen is that our shape and image is going to be a different look. It's going to be a different shape. It's going to be a different thing, but connected to the other people that we need in our lives. When we're placed in the right place, and we are in the right generation, when we quit trying to move ourselves around the puzzle so that way we can be like that part, because maybe it's that puzzle was a little kitty that's hanging on the branch saying, hang in there. And I see someone, my buddy, and he's the eye of that kitten. It's like, oh man, I want to be the eye. Look, I admire that. Even the shape is real, bold and real cool, and the image is good. But I'm like the toe of that kitten. I don't want to be the toe of that kitten. Look at me all funky, weird shaped, and my color's all brown. I ain't trying to be that. I want to be that. So I spend my entire life trying to reshape myself, trying to change the imagery of myself, and then I go up there, and the problem is when I go to fulfill the role, he's already in place. Why? Because that's exactly who he was supposed to be, and now there's an empty spot where I was supposed to be. Why does that matter? Well, if you're a believer in Christ, that whole image of God, a puzzle has an image on it. And as the pieces are placed together, then the people who look to what is this a puzzle of? The more pieces that are placed in the right place and fitly joined together, the more they can see what the true image is. You want to see what God really looks like? Quit being out there trying to be like everybody else and find your place and just be you. As you're you, someone else will be themselves, someone else will be themselves, and then it starts to produce this image of God. Genesis 1:26, 1:27. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal. No, I'm sorry. That's Romans 12:2. The Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, both male and female. He created them. That image of God is what we want to project to the rest of the world, so that way they see that there's an empty spot where they're supposed to be. It's not you're doing the wrong thing and you're blah, blah, blah. No. You can see where you're needed. A lot of people just don't want to be a part of anything spiritual because they don't see a need for them, because they're like, I'm not like that. I'm not a shanda. I'm not a this. I'm not a that. I don't wear, no, there's a place for you. There's a place in that puzzle for you, and there's an empty spot where you belong. And so we have to start looking at this. Don't be conformed to this world. I'm not trying to change who I am. I'm trying to become who I really am. But I can't become who I really am if I'm not exposed to the truths that lead me into the freedom to walk in who I really am. And so over time, that'll happen. There was a time when I thought this was horrible and that was wrong and this was right, and blah, blah. And over time, as I walked and was exposed to more truth for me, I started to have a greater understanding of who I really am and the liberties I can take. Now, there's liberties I can take now that I couldn't take in the past. Is that because God changed the rules? No. It's because I'm matured. My youngest daughter is getting her driver's license. She's going through that process right now. Now, there was a time when she, at 4 years old, still going to be the same person. Okay, same person that we're talking about. But if I would have handed her the keys at 4 years old, it would be foolish. Why? Because there's liberties that she can take now that she couldn't take back then. Not because of a different, because of the maturity of a person. And so there are things now that I can walk in, and liberties I can walk in that I couldn't at the beginning. Why? Because I needed a more structured format and template for the sake of my own safety. And so a lot of times we're like, man, if I want to live a upright life, that means I got to stop this or stop that or stop that. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but if that is something that is like, yeah, maybe you should stop doing this, that doesn't mean forever that's a rule on your life. That means right now that might be a bondage in your life and a hindrance and a weight that so easily ensnares you and it takes you down every time. And so you might feel tugging on your heart. I need to stop doing this. I need to get away from this certain person or these certain people. I need to stop listening to this kind of content. I need to stop. And there's a very structured template. And then as you grow in maturity, then you'll find that maybe you don't have as many of those anymore. And you're like, well, oh man, what happened? The rules didn't change. The maturity of the person walking this out changed. And that changes the things that we are at liberty and mature enough to walk in. And so that takes time, but that's us pursuing who it is we're really supposed to be. There's this version, he mentions it in this version of the new you. I call it the new you. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be changed by the way that you think. Transform, changed in form by the way that you think, so that way you can prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. There it is. Jesus teaches how to pray. When you pray, pray like this. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so you can prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. All of us have this perfect will plan that we can find in God. We have that. That's accessible to us. The thing we have to do is concentrate on not being conformed to everybody else, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Remember the B? The one way that you can look at how do I find the perfect will for my life, how do I find assignment, how do I remind myself who I'm really supposed to be, is you look at the opposite. In this case, the can't. It's impossible for a bumblebee to fly, yet the bumblebee was designed and created and assigned to fly. But it's surrounded by people that tell us you can't do that. Look at the can'ts in your life. Look at the people who tell you can't because of your wings. Look at the people who tell you can't do certain things that you feel natural gravitation to, and consider, are they saying that based off of jealousy, based off of bitterness, based off of, or are they just calling out what your areas of challenge are? That's what my 5th grade teacher was doing. She wasn't trying to be mean. She was just calling out my area of challenge in my life. She's probably trying to nudge me, and so that way I don't waste my time, because I was a little ham, trying to be a public figure, trying to be someone who speaks out and who cuts up and stuff, because she was, probably concerned about my future being, looking like an idiot and feeling like a failure. So she called out my limitations. But that was a can't that conflicted with the assignment on my life. I still had wings. I still had these little flappers. Big fuselage body, big, seemingly impossible challenge, but I still had it. And so my job was to, over time, become exposed to a different vision. And that vision of me only happened through exposure to different things. And as I was exposed to different things, the desire to be someone in the spotlight grew. It didn't go away. It didn't minimize. It didn't just fade, and it grew. And that's one way we can look at this thing. If someone's telling me I can't do something, yet there's the desire on the inside of me to still accomplish that, and it continues to grow, and it never goes away, no matter how bad and no matter how much I agree with them on my limitations, it continues to grow. Listen, the bumblebee doesn't listen to can't. It continues to fly. What I'm encouraging us to do today is stop looking at the can't. I'm gonna talk more on the next episode of the next step, but look at the can't in your life. These are mindset limitations. These will keep you from being who it is that you're called to be. I call it the new you versus the screw you. Why do I call it that? Because there's this new version of you, that's this person that is on the inside and that you want to become and you're striving to become. And then there's the screw you, the one that screws everything up. It's time to stop being the screw you in life. Time to start reminding ourselves of the new you. Thanks for joining me on Laugh Anyway. Hope to see you on the next podcast. Bye.